वाहेगुरु 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 वाहेगुरु.
Arvinda, this time we'll talk about symbology and leadership. Last time we talked about stories, and today let's focus on symbology from Sikhi and see what our thoughts are about these symbols. So let me see if you can see my screen. So first of all, let's look at the image of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. This is his statue in Lahore. So the image of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, it reminds us of the titles bestowed on us by Guru Gobind Singh Ji, the title of Singh and Kaur. And in a way, when we hear of other people who have these same titles as ourselves, as with Kaur and Singh, we can feel this kind of instinctual sense of affinity, as though we are part of the same family. So there is this kind of sense of kinship, which is entailed in that symbolic use of Kaur and Singh. And then in the middle, we've got Ek Onkar, which reminds us of oneness, like Ek Onkar. So everything is, we are interconnected with everything, human, and all forms of life, in fact, all forms of life, either planetary or even in the cosmos as well. So there's that grand sense of oneness encompassed in the symbolic use of Ek Onkar. And then the third picture is our sixth Guru, Guru Har Gobind, and this is Bandishore, when he was able to negotiate the release of 52 Rajas who were not Sikh Rajas, they were Hindu Rajas, but he negotiated their release from prison, holding on to his tailcoat. So that's symbolic as well of humanitarianism. So the affinity is not only with those who are similar to ourselves, the affinity, that connectedness, is with all of mankind, all of life, in fact. So for you, if we look at these three symbols, like the symbolic use of Singh and Kaur for kinship, and then the humanitarianism, the oneness, the interconnectedness of life, when we think about leadership, now I know you are a keen kind of enthusiast in terms of leadership, but in leadership, sometimes it can be a lot easier to lead people if there's that sense of kinship with them, isn't it? Like if there are people who share the same values and share the same interests, it can be easier to lead them compared with those who are very diverse. What do you think?
I think also I'm quite inexperienced at the moment, because I'm still quite I haven't had the opportunity to lead on that sort of level at the moment. But I think I do agree, because I've read some university papers where it's like the people that are similar to you, it's easier to connect to them. And even like through recruitment, and we hear about unconscious bias and stuff, we try to look for people that are quite similar to us, whether it's in beliefs or appearance or any of that sort of, like any sort of characteristics in that sort of sense. I think it can, from a Sikh point of view, it sort of encompasses everybody, regardless of faith, gender, religion. We should kind of see everyone as one, as you mentioned, like the Ek Onkar symbol. The oneness in all, although it might be very difficult, especially in Kaljuk, to see that oneness in everybody. We should be on that sort of level of like a San Savai, like a saint soldier, where we are seeing the light of God in everyone, and we are respecting everybody as, regardless, like I mentioned, regardless of where they come from or background. So yeah.
And it's very easy to remind ourselves to encompass that humanity within our embrace. But what about when others find that because of our differences compared with them, they cannot see us in that leadership position because they don't trust us, because we're not the same as them? So we can be responsible for our own, widening that embrace and encompassing humanity. But what about when we are left out of the embrace of others because we are different to them?
I think in that case, it would just be, personally, I would kind of say, like, show them, lead them by example. If I'm being left out, it must be like, so they might not understand the background of Sikhi, they might not know about the rich history of Sikhi, but then we can take a leaf out of the Guru's book, where it's always by leading by example. the Gurus always, anything they said, they did themselves. Like, for example, Guru Gobind Singh Ji Singh taking Amrit, right? He took Amrit himself as well, you know? And there are many countless examples, we can go on forever, but just sort of try hardest, keep working at it, and just show that you are worthy of being sort of in that position. And slowly, people start to realize that, oh, he's, this person does good actions. That Sikhs are known for being like kind of like nice people, free food. Like that's what most people would say, that non-Sikhs would say. I've had compliments when I ask people like at work, like, what do you know about Sikhs? They're very nice people. They're always serving food. They're always helping out the poor and stuff. So it might be difficult to see that, because obviously in that sort of position where you might be discriminated, it can be quite disheartening. But I think, we just got to push through and just keep going.
Yeah, I suppose you're right. With that generosity of spirit, we know we're generous because we go to the Gurdwara and we partake of langar, etc. But people like Ravi Singh from Khalsa Aid, he goes out to organizations outside of the Gurdwara, doesn't he? He goes on humanitarian missions where it's not simply being concerned about other Sikhs in trouble, it's about being concerned about humanity in trouble, isn't it? Regardless.
Yeah.
And I suppose Maharaja Ranjit Singh demonstrated a very high level of skill in that, because he was actually invited by the Muslims to be their Maharaja in Lahore. And that's quite an achievement, isn't it? That people of another faith invite you to lead them, and he led them very well, not discriminating against any of the faiths, and making sure that he was not favoring Sikhs above others. And he had a very diverse range of people that he governed over from Lahore and the Kingdom of Punjab.
Yeah, definitely. And also in the example of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, he took Raj, I believe, when he was about 19 or 20. And at the age of 6, he suffered smallpox. And so from face value, if you didn't know who Ranjit Singh was, you look at the guy and you'd be like, oh, I'm not sure if he can be a king, if he can be a king in the future or not. But then you see the legacy he had by sort of pushing out the Afghan invaders out of Lahore. I think it was in 1799, and then becoming king. So he pushed through the hardship, and he showed by example. So.
That's right. Okay, so excellent. So symbolically, all of those symbols demonstrate to lead by example and to have a wide embrace. Now let's look at these symbols of the symbolism of langar, where we sit on the floor and we eat together, regardless of who the next person is. We don't kind of like think, oh, we have to only stay in our family groups to eat. And this was quite a radical act, because Guru Nanak Dev Ji, he wanted to transform the social order and to create equality between the higher castes and the lower castes, and he advocated sitting together and eating together equally. And then the middle picture, Guru Gobind Singh Ji, his followers from all walks of life and different castes. At that time, people from the low caste were not allowed to ride on horses, because that was seen to be them rising above their station, and they would be punished for riding horses. But he broke that social order and allowed everyone to ride on horses should they wish to do so. And then we've got Mai Baggo in the third image. Mai Baggo led 40 followers of Guru Gobind Singh Ji. She led them back into battle after they had left the Guru. She took them back into battle. And so the gender equality, the symbolism that you don't, just because you are a woman doesn't mean to say that you can't ride on a horse and you can't lead an army. So symbolically, all of these images, they all symbolize a transformation of social order, breaking of status quo. So in terms of transformation in the contemporary world, how do you think that we're using this symbolic kind of behaviors to be equal, and at the same time to not be limited by what society says we can and can't do in terms of being free, in terms of being liberated? What do you think?
I think from firstly, beginning with a cultural point of view, like Punjabi culture, I think we've kind of failed ourselves, because a lot of the times we fall on the cultural side rather than the Sikhi side. And for example, gender equality, like we'd see women as lower. Like we wouldn't have like women performing kirtan or maybe doing Panch Pyare this year, but like this sort of stuff is affected by culture. So that's why I think at the moment, although like Sikhi, we believe in gender equality, but that's not really being sort of portrayed. But if you go to the Gurdwara, all the Granthis are men, and you know, the committee members majority men. I think from a Sikh point of view, like always, like, the Gurus always sort of challenge the status quo for the right reason. For example, in the Mughal Empire was quite sort of like tyrannical, right? But the status quo that the Gurus tried to implement was on the themes of righteousness. So, for example, gender equality, the concept of langar, and also the Khalsa being fighting against tyranny and the sort of the kings that are very abusive. So in a sense, like in the modern context, like for example, we can take for example Afghanistan and the Taliban, right? Like what they're currently doing is we could argue it's like an extreme form of like Islam, you could say, where they're completely like fundamentalists, and the actions that they're doing from a Sikhi point of view would be very unrighteous, especially the treatment towards the women, not allowing them to go to schools and so on. So I think to answer the question, the Gurus, the reason that they challenge against the status quo was essentially to bring about that path of righteousness. That's why.
And with simple gestures, like, for example, breaking the taboo. So where some people were not allowed to ride on horses, they broke that taboo and rode on horse. So riding on a horse was an act of defiance. So think about in the professional realm. I know like you are still studying at the moment, but are there things where you feel that you have broken through and excelled and done things that maybe like your peers thought it wasn't possible for you to do?
I think it's too early to say that at the moment, but I think, like for example, like learning about Sikhi and stuff has really excelled in my sort of growth, and me believing in myself and what I can do as like sort of as an individual, as like you might say like an ethnic minority within the UK. Sikhi has kind of like given me that fire and spark that when I'm in a big meeting with like even like executives or trustees or whatnot, that like I was supposed to be like the lion, still I have that sort of persona about me, and it's giving me that confidence, that boost. So in that sense, yes, I think at the moment, like I said, it's too early to say whether this degree apprenticeship program, for example, I'm the only Sikh on it, right? And when I first joined, I wasn't really into, I didn't have the start and whatnot, I wasn't really following Sikhi. But I think some of the things that I've done at work, maybe you could kind of say that. But yeah, I think it's too early to say at the moment. So.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, let's talk about the next set of symbols. So here we have got the symbolism of Gurumukhi. At the time that Gurumukhi was created by our gurus from the letters that already existed in the Landa script, they chose to formalize Gurumukhi as a script for writing the Gurbani, which was in innovation. They created something which didn't already exist. They didn't use the scripts that already existed at that time, like Sanskrit and Arabic and Farsi. They didn't use those scripts. They created a new script. They created a script which was more appropriate to use, like through, to express their own Gurbani. And the Nishan Sahib, we raise the Nishan Sahib on the Gurdwaras, and the raising of the Nishan Sahib kind of like symbolizes ownership of that space, the space of the Gurdwara in which we have the space that we have struggled to claim our authority to behave according to our own values. And then we've got the Khanda, which symbolizes activism in terms of miri, biri, and righteousness and the sword of justice, as it were. So when we look at these symbols, in leadership, innovation is really important. Activism is really important, because we can't be influential leaders unless we are acting for something and, causing some type of change, and that we have ownership of what we are claiming in terms of our achievements. So for you, how are these relevant to leadership from your perspective, being a student, in terms of how innovative we are, how active we are, and what is it that we've achieved through Sikhi?
I think that for me, the biggest one is the Nishan side. I mean, the concept of like, for example, we go to any country, the first thing we kind of do is we're trying to find, like, imagine back in the 60s or 50s when like the first Sikhs came, not the first, but like my family came in the 60s, 70s, right? They find a land to build a good one, and then they put their flag in as well. It's kind of like, you know, when, for example, the American moon landing, when America landed and they put the American flag down, just show their sovereignty. That's essentially what we do all over the world. Wherever there's a, like, the Gurus stand, we do the exact same thing, which is pretty awesome. And again, to me, it kind of just shouts like Kasta Raj. Like, although we don't have it right now, you know, it's gonna come at one point. But this is just kind of like the like a teaser sort of, if you will. The invention of the Gurumukhi script also, like, as you mentioned, it's our own sort of system, our own language that the Gurus invented themselves, and Guru Nanak Dev Ji and then Guru Angad Dev Ji kind of formalized. And also the Khanda, like you mentioned, is a sign of, like, again, the sovereignty. It's a symbol of Sikhi in the modern sense. But yeah.
About activism, isn't it? It's about, I suppose, with leadership, if we remain static, we're not really being leaders unless we are taking some sort of action to do something better, to improve things for ourselves and for others as well. So for you then, in terms of innovation, you know, being a student, in terms of innovation, because innovation starts with identifying the needs, you know, empathizing with people and seeing what is it that people need. And so what are you striving for in terms of completing your studies to do what good, what value would you like to add to the world through your innovative kind of endeavors?
I think for me, it's more in the lines of what the course I'm doing, the social change course, like increasing diversity, inclusion, equality, kind of being a voice for, like, the ethnic minority within the UK. Since, you could say, I mean, it's been an issue since day, but especially since last year, Black Lives Matter protests, and you know, you see the level of inequality and discrimination, and most recently the Sarah Everard case and the inequality for women and stuff. It's very prevalent, especially in a country such as the UK. You know, so my sort of goals and aims in the future are to help those sort of causes and help, like, the ethnic minority, regardless of, you know, they could be a Muslim, a Hindu, you know, wherever they might be, just to help them get to the sort of, like, kind of like, for me to become a leader and then me to show them, like, we can do it, sort of thing. Like, we just got to push hard, and, you know, there'll be challenges, but we can sort of surpass it.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's really important that you've mentioned there, like the Black Lives Matter and women's issues, for example, because it's not simply about kinship. It's not simply about doing what will be good for those who are like us. It's about doing good for humanitarian, you know, human beings, you know, so it's about humanitarianism rather than like a tribal thing. It's not about a tribal thing, it's about a humanitarian thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Leadership in humanitarian terms. And in terms of the qualities that we need, like courage and confidence and creativity, how do these symbols enable us to foster or to develop or to sharpen these, you know, our courage, our confidence and our creativity, and also our compassion?
I think for me, the symbol of the Khanda, for example, and then the Nishan side, it just, for me, like, it symbolizes sort of tolerance. Like, I think whenever look at this, the Khanda of the Nishan side, it always reminds me of, like, Shaheed Singhs, or like amazing saintly warriors that we had in the past, back in 1700s, 1800s. The level of tolerance they had, like, let's talk about Maharaja Ranjit Singh, for example. Like, his board was very diverse, and you could say he was practicing equity, diversity, inclusion, like, back in 1800s. And you look at the big businesses now, and even countries, they don't have those principles in place. And Ranjit Singh was, like, he was celebrated by all, regardless, like, not just the Sikhs, but everybody, you know, sort of enjoyed him and loved his reign. But for me, the tolerance has to be the biggest aspect, because Ranjit Singh was open to all ideas. You know, he employed Hindus, Sikhs, even Christians, and even ex-Napoleonic, like, officers as well. They came in to help advance his military. So I think for me, the biggest one is tolerance, because, like, for example, in Guru Tegh Bahadur's story, for example, like he sacrificed himself. He was martyred for the Hindu faith. That was from tolerance. We disagree with the ways that Hindus believe, but we believe that they have a God-given right to worship the way they do. So
yeah, I suppose Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji's life, that's an example of altruism, isn't it? Altruism. He sacrificed his own life for the sake of others.
Yeah. And like I said, it always links back to leading by example. Like what the gurus said, what gurus always did. And for us as like a Sikh, it's really powerful. It's something I want to follow.
And I suppose the other thing about leadership is that it's about being seen it's about visibility as well. So I give you an example of like how important that visibility is, because, for example, Guru Gobind Singh Ji's two youngest sons, when they were bricked alive, and there were people watching them being, slowly, suffocated. And those who saw that happen, something changed in them, didn't it? It was like you couldn't fail to be moved and to be transformed by the courage shown by these young men. So there is, if that had happened behind closed doors, it might not have moved, so many souls to kind of like see that atrocities were being committed, I suppose. So even that, that courage, that confidence, it needs to be visible as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, 100%. And that's why, like, for example, in the Qara at the start, like, that shows as a Sikh, like, especially being in leadership, that's our root, that's our appearance. And like, you can easily extinct, like, it's sort of like, see, if you're walking down the street, like in London, for example, it's very busy, we could easily identify a Sikh because he's wearing a turban or he's got a Qara on. And especially, like, so for example, it's like a leader or CEO, you instantly know, like, you're Sikh because of his appearance.
Yeah, because some people say, oh, my religion is private, it's personal, and in Sikhi it's not personal.
No,
isn't it?
Yeah,
it's public because it's a way of life rather than it's not simply about our internal kind of thought systems and whatever, it's about our behavior. And because it's based on our actions and our behavior, it needs to be visible, so yes, I've often found that that is like a big difference between between some religions and Sikhi, because like when I go to the Gurdwara and people even announce like how much they've donated, and like what to the younger members of the congregation, it can seem like, oh well, that's private, like why say it out loud? And it's like, well, everything is public, we don't have to hide it, and why be ashamed of, why kind of like try and keep it a secret? It's that's for me, that's always been like one of the examples of like how from different points of view, like what is personal and what is public, it's quite different. We make things like that very public, don't we?
Yeah. That's again, it's like a beautiful thing about Sikhi as well. Like you mentioned, it's both like about the mind and also your actions. Like Meri Piri is about the two swords. And it's about being proud of both. Not proud, but being sort of astute in both of those aspects. No, it's not just about like doing part all day, but you also got to act as well. But likewise, not just about acting, but do the part as well. So.
Yes, yeah. Okay, wonderful. So thank you very much, Arvinda. Thank you. That was I enjoyed my conversation with you, and I will speak with you again very soon. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. It was nice to see you today.
Wow.